Hi everyone, it's the baby Mudang, and this is the very first kind of like visual episode. I've been doing a test of some podcast episodes that I was turning out monthly on my Buy Me a Coffee, and basically now we're pivoting to more of this visual medium. So yeah, it's gonna be good. If you're new here, my name is Hain. I am an initiated baby Mudang, which basically means I'm initiated into the Korean folk shaman priest tradition. Usually shaman priests of the Korean folk tradition, which is called Mugyo, they're called either Mudangs or Paksu. Mudang and Paksu, it kind of depends on how the individual shaman priest identifies in terms of gender. And as far as I know, I don't think that there's a term yet for someone who'd more so identify as they, them, or someone who'd identify outside of just she, hers, he, his. And so yeah, so I am a Mudang in training. So I'm a baby Mudang. The Korean word for that would be Edongjeja, which basically can be translated into baby disciple. So I just go by the baby Mudang. So yeah, fun things. Today's episode is gonna be all about protection and the basics of that. But before we get there, again, some kind of like updates, I guess, for some of you who have been around and are tuning in, and who've already been following me on Buy Me a Coffee on Instagram, TikTok. The monthly newsletters are not going to change, so that's going to continue to be delivered to your email inboxes the first of every month. And for those that are not part of that newsletter yet, you can definitely sign up for it. I'll have a link to the Buy Me a Coffee in the description for this video, and you can sign up through there. But essentially, I just give different little snippets on parts of Korean spirituality, tradition, some tips, and some kind of like 101 type of things, because I realize a lot of people aren't super familiar with Mugyo, whether as an initiated person or as a layperson. I mean, most likely as a layperson. If you're initiated, you're probably learning at the very least. But yeah, I mean, for me as well, before I got initiated, I wasn't that familiar with the Korean folk spiritual practices. I had bits and snatches from childhood, but I didn't know much. So basically this newsletter is meant to help the diaspora and for anybody else who is interested in Korean spirituality outside of our westernized practices or colonized practices. Yeah, so check out the Buy Me a Coffee. Also on the Buy Me a Coffee, totally free, are basically kind of like blog posts on the Torgi seasons, which is like an agricultural calendar that Koreans used to use. Also just, random blog posts about different things like house gods and such. So go check that out as well. That's all in the Buy Me a Coffee. And any other updates? I've just been really busy doing a lot of stuff in the shrine. I mean, I'm in the shrine right now, but just like construction and making things, just like busy, just at work as well. It's been a very busy season. So yeah. So protection. Whether you're someone who is an animist, so Mugyo, the Korean folk spirituality, indigenous spirituality, is animist. So basically what that means, or all that means, is for us, everything, even inanimate objects, have an association or something to do with spirit, particularly those in nature. So bodies of water, have certain spirits associated with them. Let's say the mountains or the trees, our cars, things like that. So I know that not every practice or tradition kind of adheres to those animist beliefs. So if you're one of those people, just keep that in mind as you listen. I'm coming from more of that perspective, of that animist perspective. So some of this stuff you may have to adapt for your own practice. But yeah. So protection. In this episode, particularly for lay people, I'm gonna have just a few little things that you can do on your own. It doesn't require you to, work with a shaman priest with a Mudang or a Paksu, or like a Edong Chizao like myself. But honestly, a lot of the content is going to have to do with inner work, self-work, and your practice being grounded in your human experience, in the mundane, in the gifts and the protection that can abundantly provide for you. Okay, but anyways, let's do the fun stuff first. I really like, this is just plain salt, and I used salt before when, like I had my own practice. I wasn't really doing anything Mugyo related, Korean folk related, but yeah, I mean, salt really quite ubiquitously seems to be a good either cleansing agent or protective type tool. So when it comes to Mugyo, basically what you can do, and this is kind of one of those like basic things that everyone can do and is great, particularly if you already tend to cook a lot of Korean food or foods that happen to include these ingredients, is it's almost like kitchen craft. It's stuff that would be readily found in your pantry. So, and also if you don't tend to cook a lot, or you don't cook this kind of cuisine where you would need these ingredients that I'm about to show you, a lot of these things have a really long shelf life anyways. So as long as they're kept in like a cool, dry, dark place, they're gonna last for a bit. So anyways, the first ingredient, salt. Then we also have gochugaru, and this is basically, mine's starting to clump a little bit, but it's just Korean chili flakes, and the association with the color red in a lot of our tradition has to do with just lowly ghosts and lowly spirits being afraid of this color itself. So one of the practices we have on winter solstice, which in Korean we call 동지날, is that a big pot of red bean porridge is made out of I don't know, red beans, dried red beans. There we go. Big pot of red bean porridge is made, and the bean itself is red, as you can see, and then you eat it. But also a big part of that day, since it is a day where the night is longest out of the whole year, it's thought that a lot of lowly spirits are wandering around and whatever not. So one of the defenses for the people was to smear the porridge on their home and around their home to scare away the lowly spirits. So red, you'll notice, is a reoccurring theme if you ever read more into Korean folk spirituality, or you keep up with this series of mine. And then lastly, okay, let me see if I can get a little bit here for you. All right, Ta-da! Okay, so it's dried. I dropped a piece. So this is soup, which is Korean mugwort, which is different than what most, I think, Western practices use. But you'll see soup used a lot too. When it comes to like protecting and cleansing and those kind of things. I have yet to see soup in a market already dried. I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe I just missed it, but I think because it's such a delicate, it's almost like the way the plant is when it's not dried, it's a bit more delicate, kind of like cilantro. So I think that might be why they don't tend to really dry it. And it's not hard to get here. So I think most of the time I see it in the produce aisles with the other veggies, and they're just in like fresh bundles, or they'll put it on the little styrofoam tray, saran wrapped, and it's just fresh soup. So I usually go to the market, I grab a good amount of the fresh stuff, and then I'll dry it myself, and then that way it keeps for a really, really long time. And then occasionally, sometimes I'll make them into bundles depending on what I'm using them for. But yeah, so those are 4 ingredients. We had salt, gochugaru, pat, which is the dried red bean, and soup, which was the Korean mugwort. So what you can do with those 4 ingredients is, with the salt, the gochugaru, and the soup, so these, you can put it into like, I guess like a mojo bag. It could just be a plastic bag. It could be just something, a bag that's probably new or that can be cleaned, and that will hold them. You don't want the bag itself and the fabric to be woven in a way where it'll let the salt and the gochugaru fall through, right? So you want to make sure that it can hold all the contents inside. So you're going to put all those things into a baggie, and then what you can do is put it in front or on top of the entrance or doorway, whether it's your home or it's your actual room, or this is also, you know, like if it's for yourself, if it's for someone else, then you'd put it somewhere that's relevant to them. So maybe the doorway or entranceway to that person's room. And just check on them like quarterly. I would say at the very least refresh them about quarterly. So once every 3 or 4 months. So the upgrade to that is you can make it a little stronger or buff it up by taking the pot, the red beans, and you're going to put the number of that person's age. So if it's yourself and you're 21, then you put 21 red beans in that little protective baggie of yours, and that's gonna help buff it a little bit. If, I don't know, it's for your kid or your niece or nephew or your cousin, they're like babies, they're 5, then it's just 5 red beans. So however old that person is, that's how many red beans, dried red beans, you're gonna put in the baggie. So all of those ingredients together, there's 4, and yeah, just check on it quarterly. The other thing you can do too is, if you or someone you know tends to be someone who's, how to say, a bit more of a night light, or like a lamp in the dark, who's a light in the dark, kind of spiritually or energetically speaking, and they tend to attract a lot of spirit energy, or just things like that. If they go to a funeral or a wake, what you can do is, and also if this is yourself, you tend to be a bit more prone to attachments or just to attracting the attention of spirits, then you can take again the pat, the dried red beans, and same thing again, take as many as your age or the person who is going to use them, their age. So again, if you're 21, have 21 of those red beans in your pocket ready to go when you go to that funeral or that wake and you are leaving and you're on the way out. You're going to one by one drop each red bean until you've dropped them all. And the important part about this is that you don't look back. So sometimes you have to be a little strategic about it. Like I've had moments, like one time a bit ago, I went to like a Dias de los Muertos like thing because someone I knew had a friend who had passed, and I think they're kind of like the altar or place memorial for them was set up at this Dias de los Muertos event. So I went with them because I was helping them, and I was doing the thing where I drop the red beans, and I realized when it's concrete or when it's asphalt or these surfaces that are smoother, you have to keep in mind that these will bounce. And also because of the nature of the surface, like if it's grass, even if it's on a hill or incline or whatever, when you drop the beans, they're just gonna stay. But on sidewalks, they don't. And so I tried to be really careful about that day because it was a lot of sidewalk. And I was walking in a way where I was making sure that the beans were staying behind me and they weren't like rolling out in front of me, or I would try to like strategically walk. So if I didn't have a choice, then I would kind of veer into a patch of dirt or grass on the way back to my ride home. And again, not looking back after you've dropped all your beans. But yeah, so those are two really simple methods you can use for yourself, for someone else. It doesn't take much. One other thing, if you really want to, that I can think of is so in Korean, in Mugyo, we have something called pujok. And oftentimes, most people think of, if they're already familiar with pujok, a lot of times they think of like the yellow paper with the red ink, very similar to, I think, like the food talismans in the old like zombie films, Chinese zombie films, where they have the talisman. Or like if you played Maple Story, in the dungeons where there's like the mushies, there's like the mushrooms that are zombies, some of them would have the yellow talisman with the red letters. Yeah, so that's usually what people think of, but really pujok can come in a lot of many different forms. It could be the actual the figure, I guess, part of the pujok being etched into like wood, or it can come in sticker form nowadays, or etc. So pujok is something that's not just reserved for shaman priests, Mudang paksu, monks to make. Lay people can do them too. So if you're not initiated, you can make them. They just probably aren't gonna be as empowered, and there's some limitations. But one of the really simple designs that basically anyone can do is the design of a roaring tiger. And this one also, if you remember, rewind to when I mentioned winter solstice practices, 동짓날 practices. So this is something that also is part of those traditions for that holiday or day of significance. Depending on the region you're from, it's not always going to be a roaring tiger. I think, man, I'm trying to remember. I think there's some regions that might do like lions, or I'm brain farting, but there's other animals or symbols that they might use instead. From what I was told by my spirit mother, is that it seems like the roaring tiger is the most effective overall, just because A, tigers are native to our peninsula, or were native, and B, I think it's just probably the fact that we've used that symbol for so long. But in any case, so like I can make that for you also. Like you can make it for yourself. It's one of those things you just kind of draw or paint on a roaring tiger onto a piece of paper, and you can either keep it on yourself or put it up by your front door. And it doesn't always have to be fully displayed. You can kind of fold it and put it close to the front door. And this one thing that I did, which I think might be of interest to many of you, because a lot of us have pets nowadays, is like, this is something my spirit mom suggested, and then at the time we didn't realize how amazing it is, and then as I put it into practice, I was like, wow, this was actually a very, very great idea. So I'm going to share that with you. But if you have, I would more so recommend this with indoor pets, like probably indoor dogs, or maybe even indoor cats. So if you do have some kind of collar on them, then what you can do is make the roaring tiger talisman for yourself, and then you can attach it to their collar or their tag if they have one, or a bell, and then they kind of become this like mobile protection service, which is really cool. I myself have 3 dogs at home, amongst me and my roommates, and we put them on all 3 of the dogs, and it ended up becoming such a genius move, because originally I did it because one of my dogs is very anxious. He's a Chihuahua mix, and he seems to be very he's really sensitive to spirits, kind of like everything and anything freaks him out. And it's not even about spirits, it can be like people and sounds. He's just like that. He's a rescue, so originally it was for him more so, and I thought, if I'm gonna put it on him, they're a little pack, so I might as well put the talismans on all 3 of them. And then as the months went by, I was like, actually this was a great idea, not just for the dogs, but for the people, like the humans that live in the building, because a lot of the dogs, or actually all of them, have like a favorite person, but for the most part they're always with one of us, whoever's inside the home. And if we're all together, then the dogs are with us. And remember, each one of them has a talisman attached to them, so that was really cool. So, and they move with us. So the only thing is, just if you're gonna bathe them or something, take it off, don't get it wet. And yeah, refresh them. Same thing as with little baggies, maybe like every 3 months or so. But yeah, like, amazing. Try it. Okay, so the majority of the protection episode, aside from these fun things with the different ingredients with the pujok, is a lot about inner work. And this is something that I experienced a lot growing up, and I saw a lot of it in spiritual spaces that I was in, and just in and around a lot of different people, different events, different places and times that I'd been. Is I noticed that, and it's when I was a kid, and then also just throughout my whole life, and through my time now as a edongjeja, working with people and clients, is no amount of protection or banishing or these fancy rituals or protections set up no amount of that is really gonna get to the source of what's going on if the person who is experiencing those things hasn't done the inner work for themselves. So basically their own protection system isn't in order. Let me explain. So again, especially for those who work with spirits, and I don't mean to put it in a way where we're equal with the spirits that we work with. There's all kinds of spirits. Some people, maybe they just work with their ancestors, which is a beautiful practice in and of itself. Great. That's gonna look a little bit different than someone who works with their ancestors, has an ancestral veneration practice, and also works with house gods and local spirits. That also is going to look different from someone like myself who's initiated into a practice and works with gods, with Shin, who are obviously very elevated spirits. But at the end of the day, the theme or common thread through all of those practices is that it's relationship. And I think this can be really difficult at first, especially if you come more from kind of like a divine worshiping background. So for myself as well, I was more so on like the Catholic side of things for quite a while. So my master's is in theology, and that mindset was a little bit challenging to rework and to basically establish a new relationship or new concept of relationship. That took a little bit of time because, even if growing up I wasn't always super Catholic or whatever, seeing what is expected and the norms of how, my parents or whoever at the churches, and, also just a lot of people I grew up with, Christianity is by and large the most common religion. So a lot of the languaging, a lot of the way that people approached relationship and entered into relationship with spirits, and then also just, needless to say, being in the States, we see a lot of that reflected in many things on many levels of society and politics and just, but when it comes to working with these either nature spirits, folk spirits, or gods that belong to these practices that are not kind of wrapped around the sense of absolute worship or like this divinity type idea, it is very much relational and exchange. And to dive into that in a very intentional and in a very like a reverent, not irreverent, but just in an appropriate way, requires work in human relationships too, right? And human relationships are usually the things that we engage in the most. And when we don't have a good foundation in that system to begin with, and that's what our practice is grounded in, then those weaknesses, those misgivings, those assumptions that don't necessarily serve or benefit a spiritual relationship with elevated spirits, that's going to not really help your case when it comes to protection and just your practice in general. So when it comes to protection, I think that's why working on yourself, your own understanding of relationship, the areas that you need to work on in order to have healthier relationships and more mature, well-grounded ones, that all comes full circle in your practice. So if you aren't doing right by your human relationships, it's gonna be very difficult, if not impossible, to go anywhere past a certain point with the spirits that you work with. And I know this might all seem a little vague, but it's also because everyone also has their own unique practice, because you're different than me and I'm different from the next person over, and so the way we approach relationship already may be a little bit different, but the general sense is take care of your human life, take care of your mundane things. Those come first. If they don't, eventually, I guarantee you they're gonna come back. They're gonna come back in some way, shape, or form, whether you're guided back to them by your spirit guides, your ancestors, your gods, and then you're gonna have to do the hard work eventually anyways. So if you can't, don't delay, don't run, just do the thing. Put your head down, do the hard work. It's not pleasant, it's not easy, but it is fruitful, and that's what's going to give you the best protection when it comes to your practice, because in that process, oftentimes we learn a lot about ourselves, the things that we're not good at, the things we are good at, the things that we are afforded already by, in some way, like our birthright almost, and other things that we have to work for, areas that are going to be really difficult for us to ever really be more than competent in. There's just a lot of self-learning that happens, and I think a lot of protection has to do with that, because no protection is perfect, and that's something that you have to come to terms with if you are going to even have a practice to begin with. And this is like the tough love part a little bit, but nothing is going to be perfect. You're not going to magically pray a chant, do something, ooh, and then you're, just safe all the time, no matter what. It doesn't work that way. So it's better to accept that fact now and to understand that protection is not perfect, though it can be very good and very effective. So once you know that, then it's gonna be a lot, it's not gonna be easy, but you're going to be able to move forward in a more intentional way when it comes to approaching protection, whether it's just in your normal daily life, in the social circles, in your work hierarchies, and whatever it is, whether it's setting boundaries and setting protections there for yourself as a person, or whether that translates into your practice and the protection that you have within and outside and through that. So it's so invaluable. Do your work, do your inner work, because again, no matter how many times someone cuts something off of you or out of you or whatever, if you're not addressing the work that you have to do, then you're gonna keep having the same issues, and it's about you. It's not about anybody else, really. So yeah. For protection, I guess, you know, I should explain that a little bit more. Thanks, you know what I mean? But basically what I mean by it not being perfect is, let's say like fight sports, because I like Muay Thai and I like watching, you know, different fight sports and things like that. No matter how great the fighter, no matter how great their coach, every fighter in history, even the greats, have some kind of weakness. And especially when it comes to, we're using kind of like the fight sports space as example, when it comes to fighting, a lot of it, the deeper you go into it, the deeper you fall into fight sports, the more you train and you get past the basic level and intermediate level, the more you go on, it's really in the details where you start to see the holes of someone's defense or armor. And oftentimes it's not about, at that point, how far your reach is, how good you are at blocking or whatever not, how good you are at angles. It's the timing. It's when you choose to deploy your chosen offense or defense that leads into your chosen offense. And I view protection when it comes to spiritual, magical things, and even in mundane life, in day-to-day, I view it very much in that way. It's not about how hard I can punch. It's not about how much I know. It's, do I have the wisdom? Do I have the perspective or the intuition to know when I need to do certain things? And so protection is a lot more organic in that sense. It's not a brick wall that you build around yourself. It's not, you know, it's not holding up in some kind of bunker. It's almost more like a porous barrier around yourself that once you get good at it, you're going to let in the things that you want to let in, and you're going to keep out the things that you want to keep out. But it's not going to be this show where everything is just pushed out the door. In some ways, I guess you could approach protection that way, but it's not going to be healthy for very long. Like if you're someone who's constantly just banishing, cleansing, purifying, and that's just your aim. Like you don't want to practice, you just want it to be spiritually sterile, basically, then sure, you know, you can go ahead and do that. But if you are someone that wants to have a meaningful practice and to get really, really good at it, and have good protections, then you need to approach it more in this dynamic manner than this static, sterile, like rigid. You need to be more flexible, you know? So yeah, that's it for, oh, actually, see, this is why, so my gods are kind of like reminding me of things as I go, which I'm very grateful for, because I forget a lot of things. One more quick thing with the salt and gochugaru soup mixture, dry mixture, you can also set out lines of it in front of entrances like doors, windows, and such. For myself, because we have a lot of animals on the property, I just wasn't sure how they would all react, so I just put the salt out, which is good too. Because with 2 of the dogs, like they didn't really mess with it, but there was another dog who was kind of like, oh, nom, 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 nom. So, so just forewarning, if you think that your animals or you have little kids or something, just be careful. If it's not quite for you, again, you could just do the baggy one where it's out of reach. I think especially for kids, maybe that might be better. And then, yeah, just salt around the entrances. And another thing that I forgot to mention in the beginning, thank you, Shinyonim, is so this particular series, I don't even want to call it a series necessarily, but it's not going to have a regular posting schedule. So it's not going to be monthly like my test podcast was on Buy Me a Coffee. It's basically gonna be whenever I am moved to do so, when I'm prompted, when my shinyongnim are like, hey, you should do this and talk about this. So it was probably gonna be a little sporadic. So I would highly recommend either follow me on Instagram or sign up for the newsletter. Both of those are going to be good avenues for you to stay in the loop and to be updated on when I post things, when I announce new projects, when, you know, basically I just announce things that might be relative to you. So, and to me, of course. And I think they're laughing because I'm awkward. But yeah, I think that's it for this one. So cool. Thanks for tuning in to the first kind of like video format offering that I'm giving and putting up into the world. Like many blessings for everyone. Hope really you always get what you need, and that you are able to, you know, be empowered and to stand in your own power wherever you are, whatever you do, and to be unapologetically yourself in this world. And yeah, baby Mudang out. Bye bye.